I'm finding really weird about the fantasy book market right now is like how 90% of it is in high fantasy. Even the romantasy and the cozy fantasies. And I find that so weird because several well-known classics in fantasy are portal fantasies. To the uninitiated, a portal fantasy involves two worlds that interact with each other through a portal or a gate or some other kind of means of connecting the two worlds together. It is involved in many beloved stories, but not many of the ones that we see getting popular today. Since you're watching this video, you must either be a fan of portal fantasies or curious about them, so I'm gonna quickly plug mine. ASTER'S CODA is a portal fantasy series, and book 2 of it is hopefully gonna be published early next year. The first book, Exposure, follows Abby Tagger as she discovers that this world isn't alone and that her family is involved in a blood feud that is spanning across Earth and 2 other fantasy worlds. She enlists the help of an organization that keeps the peace between all 3 of them to be able to help her fight this war. Help me keep financially stable and pick up a copy in either a paperback or an ebook. There is a books to read link in the description. Because you can imagine that I'm plugging it right now and I really want to make sales because portal fantasy is not popular in the book market right now. I don't understand why, because it has been so critical to fantasy as we know it. How? This is a brief history of portal fantasies. So where did the concept of portal fantasies first come from? Usually you'd be able to point this towards a certain myth, but often with mythologies, the only other worlds that exist would be the realm of the gods and the underworld, and underworlds were often the most traveled to. For instance, Greek mythology. The dead, or those pretending to be dead, would travel to the underworld through a river like the river Styx, and they'd have to pay the ferryman Charon in drachmas to be able to get passage, or find some other way if that was not the easiest way for them to get passage because they didn't have the money or they weren't dead. Quite often as well, people consider geological phenomenons to be considered portals to hell. Some examples include Mount Etna, the Darvaza gas crater, or New Jersey. And yes, while these mythological stories do contain the gods meddling with the human world and the underworld, and those 3 being connected together, I would not call those a portal fantasy. This is simply because they are often depicted as being from the same world. Hades and Anubis are part of the pantheon of the world and of the gods, and so that to me implies that the underworld and the different layers of the underworlds are part of the same world. You have the divine, and then you have the mortal, and then you have the underworld, and they're all just part of the same world. I wouldn't discredit people who would consider these to be portal fantasies though, just because of the very fine line that it does hold. But I consider the root of portal fantasies to be rooted in fairy folklore. Mike Reeves McMillan, who I discovered when creating this video, is a fellow New Zealand author, so if you're watching this, hi Mike. Loved the article that you published on your blog about this. He describes Celtic folklore to be where portals first came up, and also the root of the concept of a fairy realm. The Feywild, or the Fey realm, was another world which the fairies came from, and they came to interact in our world through fairy portals. They were barrows or burial mounds. These natural phenomenons, however, they were the key to them being portals for fairies to enter. Quite similar, actually, to the concept of gates of hell being associated with geological phenomenons like volcanoes, lakes, and craters. But how does this translate into the actual stories that exist? Let's look at my good friend Tom Schatz's genre cycle. Well, he's not my friend, I've just used his works before to study genre and how genres thrive or die. You can check out that video there to fully understand the concept that I'm going to be applying to portal fantasies here. In the experimental stage, we start to see the concept of fairy portals being brought to life more through books and through plays. The play that I'm talking about is Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. Fairies from the Feywild, including King Oberon and Queen Titania, mess with humans who are staying in Athens, Greece for, I believe, if I remember correctly, it is a wedding, and there is a play being put on for this wedding. It takes place in both Athens and the fairy realm. very obvious portal fantasy connections here, and characters get taken between the two and transformed into donkeys. The literary example that we have of this is George MacDonald's 1958 novel Fantasies would be the earliest recorded depiction of a fairy portal fantasy. The protagonist of this novel discovers a fairy living in his desk, and then when he wakes up after going to sleep, his bedroom has transformed into this sort of bedroom forest hybrid, which allows him to enter the fairy realm. He has many escapades there before getting killed in that world and reawaking 21 days after he first fell asleep in his bedroom looking completely normal. This is likely where the trope of "it was all a dream" came from with fantasy fiction. And even though in the experimental stage it's typically the less popular depictions, it's still commonly used today to have fairy portals as the portal fantasy, such as Holly Black's works, where either fairies are interacting with the human realm or humans get taken away to the fairy realm. Now we move on to the classic stage. In this classic stage, these portals led to more original worlds. They are not completely tied to fairies or mythological folklores. Portal fantasies ended up being a common fantasy in the late 19th century onwards, especially for children's fiction, with books like Alice in Wonderland, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and Peter Pan and Wendy being notable examples of fantasy fiction that has been still considered among the greats to this day, and of course adapted to no end. And an interesting note as well is that Alice and Dorothy, like the novel Fantasies, wake up from a dream to get out of this fantasy world. The Fantasies also ended up being an inspiration for Tolkien, and also for C.S. Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. Probably one of the most talked about and popular fantasy stories ever, even if there is religious connotation scattered throughout. I don't fully know, I have not read the book itself, I've just seen the movies. Throughout the novels, different members of the Pevensey family would enter Narnia through different means, the most popular one and the one in the first book being through a wardrobe. And in this world we have witches and centaurs and satyrs, talking animals, tree spirits, and so much more. There are two things worth noting here. First off is we're seeing less depictions of using nature to travel through these worlds, and there's more often man-made things being used to travel in these worlds. The wardrobe from Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe being the main example, but also in the Alice in Wonderland sequel, Through the Looking Glass. Alice obviously travels through a looking glass, which today is referred to as a mirror. But it's also worth noting that in these four works that I have just mentioned in this classic stage, the people traveling to and from these worlds are children. Quite notably also young girls: Alice, Dorothy, Wendy, and Lucy. Catherine Langrish of the blog 7 Miles and Steel Thistles argues that this use of children is because children are an easier tool to depict whimsy and not depict doubt. If an adult were to travel into these worlds, they would be doubting things, probably thinking they were on a drug trip or going mad, but a children will take the whimsy and the wonder as it is. Before we move on to the revisionist stage and the sort of 90s period where we see more and more different kinds of portal fantasies, I need to make a note. So many people, when I was researching this video, think that Harry Potter is a portal fantasy. And you know I only talk about Rowling's works to shit on them nowadays. Because fuck turfs. These dumbasses think that Harry Potter is a portal fantasy because you have to run through these portals that are hidden to other people to get to different locations. But they're not going to worlds. A key part of portal fantasy is that you're going to a different world. And it's the same fucking world. This is why I write portal fantasies and they write articles that I didn't even source in this video. Portal fantasy ended up dying out soon after this stage, or not being depicted in the same way. Mike Reeves McMillan argues that it's because of the colonialist implications about these protagonists who come from Earth being the saviors of these worlds that they weren't a part of. It's giving white savior. So that kind of trope has definitely been reduced in the depictions of portal fantasies going forward. Now, usually in this point, we would get to a parody stage, but It's very difficult to find a portal fantasy parody that isn't just the explicit commentary on works like those stupid epic movies and how they parodied Narnia. Hate those. But I think it's because of how often the genre is designed to make fun of itself and make fun of fantasy. You deliberately have these fish out of water characters coming into a new world and trying to work out the new laws of it. They are logic coming into madness. And you can't really make fun of that in a parody way because portal fantasies sort of already make fun of that themselves. They are very self-aware in that way. But portal fantasy hasn't completely died out because we are seeing some more revisionist stages coming up. The main culprit is Seanan McGuire's Wayward Children series. This series answers the question of what happens to these children who come back from these worlds. The School for Wayward Children is a boarding school in this society that takes care of these children and helps them overcome the grief of leaving their worlds, helps them work out ways to fit into normal society while still embracing themselves, and hopefully also find ways to return back to their home worlds. It is a very self-aware piece of work with ways to chart different kinds of worlds, from logic to madness and goodness to evil, and also explorations as to why these children came into the world in the first place, usually because of parents and other people around them prejudicing them. So this series, yes, is full of a lot of queerness and a lot of different kinds of representation, which I love. Another set of stories that offers a revisionist concept is His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. While portals are often found in nature and natural phenomenon, in His Dark Materials, these don't exist. They are man-made. One of the main characters, Lord Asriel, literally has to perform a severely cruel act to be able to create a portal to another world in the first book. Other stories have followed suit by making these man-made portals, such as Stargate. Yes, I know it's a sci-fi, but it helps my point. But also another revisionist stage, which I think has become the new portal fantasy associated genre because it has developed so much conventions and so many different tropes with it, is through anime, and is a type of portal fantasy called the Isekai. While the Isekai is a portal fantasy, not all portal fantasies are Isekai. It has very specific sets of rules and conventions. It does follow the basis of a portal fantasy where a protagonist or another character gets put into a world that isn't their own. But there are some extra rules and some portal fantasy rules that also get bent or broken. Amanda Pagan of the New York Public Library says that to get to these worlds, there can either be a portal or they can be spirited away. Wait, that's why it's called Spirited Away. Oh my god, I'm so stupid. They could also end up getting reborn or reincarnated into a new world, they being the protagonist. Most often, these isekai plotlines revolve around the protagonist trying to escape from this new world, or it revolves around them having to survive in this new world because there is literally no way for them to go back. Digimon would probably be one of the most popular isekai franchises out there. First created in 1997, this franchise first revolved around toys and the masculine counterpart to Tamagotchi. There is lore that the monsters trapped inside of these devices are from the digital world, and the monsters can either come into Earth, or a human can go into the digital world to grab one of these monsters themselves. An isekai world, according to Pagan, doesn't necessarily have to be a completely new world. It can also be entering a new timeline for a protagonist to fix their mistakes made in their past, to be able to give them a second chance at life. Sometimes it can even be transported to a specific period in history. Isekai has become such a well-known term that was developed in the late 90s that it's now being used to describe English-based stories such as Alice in Wonderland. And more classic portal fantasies can be seen influencing stories such as Alice in Borderland. There's also such thing as a reverse isekai, where someone from a magical world or one not like ours gets trapped in our own world. A more modern and Western example of this would be the Disney movie Enchanted, in which a Disney princess ends up getting transported to New York City. With the popularity of video games as well, in more modern isekai interpretations such as Sword Art Online, characters get transported into video games, and they are aware of the video game stats to help them build up their own characters and survive in this video game world. But once again, we must pause, because we still have probably a lot more chapters left in portal fantasy if isekai is becoming so popular today. What other kinds of portal fantasies and isekai will we see in the future? Which ones will be most popular? Who knows? Maybe it will involve a society who is trying to keep peace between multiple worlds and make sure that conflicts that happen between worlds don't end up escalating too far. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos relating to other worlds that you can escape into, then please do subscribe to this channel. I've got a whole bunch of other fantasy-based video ideas coming up, including some studies on some of your favorite fantasy franchises. Which ones? You're going to have to subscribe to find out. Thank you guys for watching. I shall see you in another world.